Well, welcome to Cortez. Have you been here before? Have you visited?
I haven't actually, no. I did live in Pueblo for 3 years. We made our way kind of west, a little bit more north, up towards Montrose a couple times, up to the Black Canyon of Gunnison and kind of those tourist attractions, but I didn't make it down as far south and west.
Right, good. Well, welcome aboard, and it's a good place to live and work. You made a good choice.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other comments, questions? Okay.
Well,
thank you,
welcome.
sir. Welcome. Okay. The next item on the agenda is a presentation by members of the city boards. The first member is the Golf Advisory Board, Sam Jarvis. Good evening, Sam. Would you go up to the podium and introduce yourself, please?
It's green now, but I'm not starting over, just so you know. No, early, enough of that. So Dan Burnley is the men's representative. Our representative from the Women's Association is Claudia McNair. We do have a youth member from the high school, Thayer Plew, who's a very, very active young man. He's an incredible golfer, number one. But he's got a lot of great ideas for the course. Of course, Micah Radowski is our pro. Tom Kramlich, which has been our superintendent now. I think we're going on to 4th year. And this gentleman, I don't know how we got him to Cortez, Colorado, but he is incredible. What he does for our course is just phenomenal. And I've seen a lot of golf courses in a lot of places. But what we get from our superintendent and our professional far exceed most of the places that I've been. And that's municipal courses as well as private courses. It's just that good. And of course our council representative is Arlena. And I would like to say in our couple of years with Arlena, she's only missed 1 meeting. And she's been very responsive and she always has good input. Which we appreciate because we like to know what's going on at the council, and we're hoping that she takes our recommendations from our committee back to the council. Basically, we're tasked with making sure the operation of the course is satisfactory, or we prefer it to be excellent. We try to drive our course so that in our area, we want to make it the premier municipal course in our little Four Corners area. And I think between Micah and Tom, we've been able to accomplish that. We meet once a month. We meet at 7 o'clock in the morning on the last Wednesday of every month. That runs from March through October. And then we're in a kind of a downtime, which we're in right now, so I don't really have a whole lot to report. I can tell you that the last year was very successful. Our numbers were up. The last 2 years have been a struggle due to COVID, obviously, but our numbers have increased, and it was a remarkable year that we had at the golf course. And we're hoping that this coming year will be equal or better than. I know there's been discussion on rates. At our last meeting, unfortunately, we didn't have a quorum, so we couldn't make a recommendation to council. And I'm not certain where council is taking that at this point. That would be good information for me to have to share with the rest of the committee. But that's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
What's your handicap?
That's a secret.
Okay.
There's too many
Well,
people
thank
that
you.
might know that.
Well, we appreciate your dedication and service to the community. Thank you.
It's my
Mr.
pleasure,
Jarvis.
and I'm going to turn the mic off.
Okay.
So
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. Next advisory board member is Karen Sheik from the Library Advisory Board. Good evening, Sharon. Karen, make sure your mic is turned on green. Good evening.
Good evening. It's really nice to be here this evening. As a member of the library board, I am very pleased to be here to be able to give you an update on the state of the library. And I have to tell you that the state of the library is very good. As a former librarian, I have to say that I am pretty proud of how libraries all across the country and probably around the world have been able to shift, adapt, pivot, if you will, as technology and other things in our world have impacted on the kinds of services that libraries provide and the business that we do. And this has continued. The Cortez Library staff has operated exceptionally well in this tradition during the past couple of very difficult years. Staff has seen changes in leadership during this time. They have had to make adjustments in how they interface with the public, which they have done admirably well, I think. They've had to reevaluate the kinds of services that they could provide and how they were able to provide those services, because libraries continue to be really, really important parts of communities. In addition, I think it's really important for you all to know that librarians do more than just check out books and shelf things, that we do more than provide information. Librarians also help to facilitate and make connections between other human beings. And I think you probably would all agree that especially over the last couple of years, when it's been very hard to maintain those connections, it's been nice to know that we have a library staff that's very dedicated and buys into that philosophy. So thanks to the commitment of our staff, our library has remained a very viable institution in our community during the past couple of years. So some quick facts. The library continues to outstrip. I used to love to tease Dean about this, but the library continues to outstrip the number of patron visitations annually when you compare it with the rec center. The composition, about half of those that use the Cortez Library live in Cortez. The other half live out in the county. And then, of course, we have a smattering of people that come in from out of the area. And our library does get a lot of folks that drop in who are on vacation, checking their email, wanting to, go online to get some additional information about maybe the next place they want to visit or whatever. So the library serves a very, very diverse population. As I'm sure you are all very much aware, our library is an aging facility. Some of our equipment is failing, some significant equipment. Our furnishings need to be updated. Our space is very tight. Programming has become a really, really important part of what libraries do, and we have a facility that was built that, although it did provide programming, because our community has grown and programming interests and needs have changed, we need more space. So several years ago, the council did approve the hiring of an architectural firm, actually the one that drew up the plans for both the Dolores and Mancus libraries. We had them come and work with the staff, work with the community to find out what the needs and the wishes were, and then to come up with a plan and some recommendations for what we might do with our library. And they did an excellent job. I sat in on a number of those conversations. I was very, very impressed with how they approached the public and how they took input. So those plans are still on hold at the library. And the board, I think I can speak for the board when I say that once the city's financial audits are all up to where they need to be, that we hope that the council will begin to look at making some long-range plans to do something with that facility. As I'm sure you probably are already aware, the HVAC system, which does need to be replaced, has been put on hold until next year due to supply chain issues. But as the staff has done for the past 2 years plus, they are continuing to adapt and move forward. They are making arrangements to purchase new carpet, which I think is probably going to be something similar to what you have in council chambers, carpet squares, because they're easier to replace. They got grant funds, and the balance of the dollars needed to purchase that will be made available through the Friends of the Library. They purchased new equipment, some new, I'm just going to pass this. Rob, if you want to. They purchased some new computer stations. They're going to be replacing some of the furniture in the children's section of the library. They are also in the process of purchasing one of these, which is an automated checkout station. Once we get it here, and I think it's been ordered or it will soon be ordered, Isabella wanted to be sure that all of the, that it aligned with the system that we have. But it will be there on the north side as you exit the library, and it will allow patrons to be able to check their materials out themselves, which will be great because, number one, it will expedite that process. If you've got lots of patrons waiting to get information or check out, you can do it yourself, and that will speed that process up. It will provide privacy. Sometimes maybe you're not interested in having somebody know that you're checking a book out on divorce or alcoholism or something, and so this allows you to check materials out without somebody looking at the title. And it also, which is important in these days, limits personal contact. So they are hoping to get that up and operating fairly soon. You may or may not be aware that we have a very strong state library system. The state provides contracts through the Colorado Library Consortium, which allows our library to make purchases at reduced pricing. They provide assistance both on and off site. They provided free COVID tests and masks for states, for all staff, and they provide free Narcan. That, you know, is the drug that if somebody's having an overdose, doesn't cost us a thing. Some library policies, library cards are free. Anybody can get one. There is no charge for the cards. There is no ID required when you go into the library. You can simply ask for a card. They will take down all the necessary information, and then they will mail the card to you so that they can confirm your mailing address. We also participate in what is called a statewide library card program. So that means that if somebody from Greeley comes down here, or even from out of state, and would like to use our facility, they can apply for a library card, and there is a $10 deposit that's required. And at the end of 6 months, if they're in good standing, that $10 is returned to them, and they have had the opportunity to use our resources. We also have removed fines, and the staff has found that's been very beneficial, that people who had fines are now returning materials instead of just ignoring the notices, and then we're having to replace materials that we probably don't have the budget nor the desire to have to replace. Staff is most appreciative of the budget that council voted into place, because it's going to allow them to purchase additional materials and Isabella also included programming in her budget this year. So we are hoping that maybe by spring, COVID will ease up a little bit so that the staff can begin to look at providing some more robust programming. Staffing continues to be a concern. They have 10 staff out of a needed, they have 10 staff actually working out of a needed 10 positions. A full-time programming position, they're looking for somebody with a very diverse background so that we can provide a diversity of programs at least 3 times a month. They're looking for a youth librarian, and they need a part-time clerk. They are planning on increasing social media, including Instagram and Twitter, and ramping up their marketing on these platforms. They want to work with the new rec director to develop a story walk around the park. Dolores has one. Isabella has a program where they will do prison checkout, books to prison inhabitants. In closing, I would just like to say, and I'm sure you guys already know this, our library staff is probably our most valuable asset. Our library is now led by a director, I believe, who has an understanding of what inclusion means and what diversity looks like. And I think she puts that into practice every day and considers it with every decision that she makes. We have a staff that works really hard, that are nice to work with, that are helpful and accommodating. We all like to be recognized, and we all want to feel that the work that we do is valued. So I would like to thank Drew. He goes down and visits with staff, and I can tell you that is most appreciated. They are also appreciative of those of you on council who have gone down to stop in and see what's going on. And if you haven't been by lately, take a little time to stop off at your library. Learn about what's new. They'd love to give you a tour. They'd like to talk about the programs they're planning or some of the new materials that they've just gotten in. And I would suspect they could get you a library card very quickly if you don't have one, and also give you some recommendations for a good read, a new book on tape, or a DVD that might be of interest. Questions? Well, great. Visit your library then. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for sharing this information, Karen. We appreciate that. I see there's a member of the Library Advisory Board in the audience tonight. John Kelly, would you come up and introduce yourself? Just say hello. Just go up to the podium.
So,
Push the button there until it turns green.
basically, my name is John Kennedy. I've been Library Advisory Board member since 2018, the first time under Eric. And I will say thank you for possibly having me on such a term. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you, John Kelly, for your service. Appreciate it. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the Parks and Recreation and Forestry Advisory Board Chairman, George Tripp. Good evening, George. Would you go up to the podium and introduce yourself, please? Make sure the mic is turned on green.
Mr. Mayor, can I cut in just before George starts for just a moment? If we can just let the public know that we're having some technical difficulties. From their end on YouTube, they're probably seeing a flashing screen. We're broadcasting at least the audio. We are so sorry about the flashing screen that we just can't get the hardware right now to replace it, but it's better than nothing. We turned it off in here so that it doesn't distract too bad from folks, but please just be understanding. And if we could maybe allow me to say that again at council meeting when that officially starts. So sorry to cut in, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Tripp.
Everybody hear me all right? Hi, my name is George Tripp. I'm on the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Advisory Board, and I hope to give you an update of what we've done the last year. I don't know if you've all, tried to give everybody a handout. I don't know if it got passed out today, but it has basically the summary of our meetings for the last year. So I'm just going to give you a whole summary of what we did. There's a list of things that we went over, and I'll let you look through that, and if you have any questions over it. In summary, we held 7 full meetings last year between April and November. We discussed 4 new projects and 12 updates on issues on existing projects, and those were the projects I listed in that paper. And all these were what Dean Palmquist presented us. All meetings were held at the sites that we were discussing, except for maybe 1 or 2 that we had to have on Zoom. A favorable motion was given to the 3rd Street Pocket Park Community Garden construction, and I think it's proceeding now. Support was given to proceeding with the Arbor Day celebration. I think went pretty well, considered we had COVID issues to get around and everything else. And we had support for the reopening of the outdoor pool, which I think worked fairly well. There was not full opening, but worked as well as they could with staff members that they could hire. Disc golf expansion is supported, but I don't think it's been started yet, but there's still support in going through with that. Veterans Park Memorial updates, I think it will be proceeding soon, but there's a few things with walkways that need to be worked around, tree roots and that type of thing. Softball complex lighting, we met there and we're supporting that lighting changes be completed at some point. We're in support of a tennis court hitting wall. There's one that was at the old ones, but it's kind of been used by pickleball players, so a new wall would be very helpful in support of tennis court and maybe lessons coming up and that type of thing. And the Native American art panels are still in discussion, kind of how that will be worked out, placement, areas, best exposure and that type of thing. Some of our high priority items that we would like to probably start into in 2022 is, or make sure we're maintaining, is a good tree and plant maintenance process. We had Roman on our board that's an arborist, and he's been around looking at the trees, and he had a good ideas for what we need to do to keep those trees healthy throughout the park. Park water management is always an issue, or it has been the last few years, but hopefully we get some snow and we get some help on that. But there's always maybe some mulching around trees and things like that to slow down evaporative rates. Ensuring new projects maintain open space. I think there's been discussions on a band shell going into different places, but I think there was concerns about taking up too much of the open space that are enjoyed by most of the public right now, and we keep that in areas where we maintain that open space. Reviewing, realigning the master plan to reflect public interests and budget requirements, updating the community action plan. I don't know if there's a community action plan that was part of the Heart and Soul grant, I believe, and I have not seen it, but it would be nice to have something to that in that document. But updating kind of where we're at with budget requirements that have come up and where we want to go with some of our projects and what's feasible, especially things like the South Community Park and those type of things. We need to get some new members. We're running short on members, and especially members that will represent the community better, and especially high school members. It'd be nice to get some of those. We haven't had anybody on there for the last 2 years that I know of, so it'd be nice to get their outlook on things. And getting exposure of updated park amenities for expanded local and visitor use. That idea is you know, we had discussions of a map in Cortez. It shows recreational features like you'd see in a tourist town, a visitor's map, information at the airport, updating on the website, just getting a lot of information out there. We had a case where I met some visitors that were coming to Cortez and they wanted to go to the tennis courts, and they looked on Google Maps and they found the tennis courts next to the pickleball courts, and those were not a good representation. They missed the real better tennis courts we have right out here by the rec center. So getting updated information, I think, would be very valuable for the community. Are there any questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing this information, Mr. Tripp. Appreciate that.
I'll just leave this on, so I don't want to miss it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next member is the Rosa Diamond, Cortez Youth Commission Recreation Supervisor is Rosa Diamond. Good evening, Rosa.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council. I am the staff liaison for the Cortez Youth Commission. Right now, we are meeting on the first and third Tuesday. We're meeting at lunchtime at the school library. That meeting time, we are going to be discussing at our next meeting if it's going to stay or change. We might lose staff or commissioners if we stay at that time, just because of the change in school schedule. A lot of clubs are now meeting at that same time. So we're looking at a couple of different options, whether it's before school or looking at a Friday option as well. We have 4 commissioners that were approved back in November, I believe it was. Just in the past few months, we had those 4 members approved, Jada Mitchell and Willa Rice, that were returning members, and then Grace Shepard and Emma Olson. We have 2 possible members that have joined one meeting and will be hopefully attending another meeting coming up. Our goal is to have 7 to 12 members. So right now we're focusing on recruiting. We've rebooted our Instagram page because apparently that's the best way to advertise to that age group. I have Emma Olson that's heading that up for me right now, and then just focusing on community outreach as well. One of our commissioners has, we've been discussing them joining the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, so we're just looking at that. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. We appreciate your sharing this information. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the update by Interim Public Works Director Rich Landreth on the status of the hydroelectric plant. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This is kind of a continuation of a discussion we started during the budgeting process. And so I put together a memo for Drew with a little bit more history, a little bit more detailed information about the situation that we're in. As you know, we had a, excuse me, about 11 years ago now, we had the hydroelectric plant built. We acquired a 20-year loan from the Water and Power Authority, and then we also entered an agreement with Empire Electric for purchasing of our power that we produce. At that, excuse me, at that time, we were barely able to make our loan payments, through our production of power. But in 2019, we had needed to renegotiate our contract, and that contract was not to our benefit. I have some numbers down there, and by the way, I see one really bad typo that I made, so that number for energy credits for 2009 through 2020 should read, the second number should be 0.1, not 1. It'd be nice if we got $1 for every kilowatt hour we produce, but that wasn't it, so sorry about that, my apologies. But you can see that the difference between the two, essentially our rate was cut in half. So that means that at the current time, we struggle to produce half of the amount that we need for our loan payments. And so And you can see at the very bottom, you know, we've been talking about all kinds of, you know, possibilities. What could we do? How can we manage this? We've been talking with the Water and Power Authority about restructuring our loan. I called Canyon Hydro, our supplier, and asked if there was a market for our equipment, that we might be able to sell it. And you see what their response is, that these are built specifically for our all of our needs, and they, you know, you'd have to have somebody else that has the same characteristics as we do. So at this time, you know, we are wondering and want to have a discussion about where we go with the hydroelectric plant. I would take questions. We owe, you know, we still owe about $500,000, right, on this loan?
Yeah, it's almost 600,000.
Yep. 9 more years now, and you know, it's you know, really the issue is, you know, last year we had a major repair that we had to make. One of our big pieces of equipment went down. At the same time, since it was down and we had to shut down for an extended period of time, we decided to pull the generator itself. We had the bearings replaced and we had the unit cleaned. It's in great shape. You know, the electronics are now in good shape. But, you know, that effort was like $90,000. So, you know, when you add those kind of things up to not even being able to come up with about half of our loan payment, it makes it pretty difficult.
Rich, did you say that at the time that we took on this project, we could barely even make the payments? Is that what you said?
We barely made the payments. Yeah, we barely made, you know, you see that our payments are like, what is it, $69,000 a year, right at 70. And we were making that. But now, of course, like I say, you know, we're not even coming close. So it's a drain on us. So, you know, we're wondering about, you know, it's running great right now, and I predict it'll run well for a while, but if we have another catastrophic failure like we did last year, it brings into question whether we'd want to put any money into it.
Rich, are there other annual costs to operating the hydroelectric plant?
There is, you know, there's staff time, and of course there's regular maintenance and upkeep. We just finished replacing a part, you know, and these are all fairly small, you know, these are, you know, really the staff time is, excuse me, is paid from the water plant. You know, we go up there, we take readings, we grease the bearings, you know, those kind of things, so it's fairly minimal.
So you mentioned the one alternative that you were considering there with Canyon Hydro. What have been some other thoughts that have come up?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that we essentially, you know, well, we run until we have a catastrophic failure, and then we just shutter the thing. There's a couple of parts that does, you know, you can see, excuse me, the generator itself, you know, it has value. It's a rather large motor, you know, it can be used either as a generator or a motor, so it does some value, but it's a small amount. It's compared to the whole unit. So that's certainly an option, or is this something that the city, you know, I mean, when it was put in, this was a good idea. You know, we didn't know that things would turn out the way they did. So maybe it's worth keeping it around. I don't know.
Is this one of the debts we're trying to pay off early? And in our contract with Empire Electric, do we have to keep it in operation for the next 10 years?
No, we do not have to keep it in operation. You know, if we can get a little bit out of it, like it's not right this minute, it's not really costing us anything, but we're heading towards a repair. You know, at some point, I think there are some things that need to be done this spring, if I recall. Yes. So no, we don't have to keep it going. Yes, this is on the list at the end of fiscal year 22. Once we make that payment, we will owe $508,000 and change on it, and it is part of our overall debt plan that Director Koski and I have been working on. Realistically, the best thing for us to do is pay it off, see how long we can run it, get whatever we can, milk whatever funds out of that we can, and probably just mothball it. We're just trying to inform council of this is the bad news, this is what we're up against, and if you all have some good suggestions, please let us know, but that's where we're heading.
Is the 508,000 still left on the debt service? Is that the principal, or is that the full debt service through 10 years?
That'll be the remaining principal left.
That's
over.
remaining,
So
okay.
we're still accruing interest on that 508 at 2%.
All right.
And the contract is a 10-year contract, is that right?
That's
So-
correct.
okay.
And let me just bring up that, if we decide to just shutter the hydroelectric plant, it doesn't kind of end there, because all of our water runs through, well, most of our water runs through the hydro plant. We would have to make some piping changes, and that would rack up a fair bill probably.
I would imagine that you guys have done a cost-benefit analysis in terms of like, okay, we keep running it for the next however many years. How much are we paying into it with service and with staff time versus what if we were to shutter it and just pay the remaining $500,000? What was that comparison?
We didn't do an in-depth comparison on that. Like I said, really, the maintenance is a fairly low amount. You've probably seen it in the budget. It's a few $1,000s. We don't even. I don't think Kelly. We don't apportion any of the wages for water plant to that. So they're just covered by the water plant, by the water enterprise. Because it's really part of water. I mean, that's where we're getting our metering is done through the hydroelectric plant. So the upkeep and maintenance is fairly low. It's just when it comes to a major failure or something like that. We're really confident of the electronics that we just put in. We're confident in the generator itself, and I would hope that it would run for years without any, but we do have other components that are now 10, 11 years old, and that's what's worrying us. Having to, we have a 24-inch mag meter in there. That is a very high dollar item, and if it went down, we'd have to figure out some way to replace it. A lot of the electronics, we replaced one portion of it, but there's 3 main cabinets in there, and if we had a problem, it could cost a lot of money. So we want you to be aware, and hopefully together we can kind of decide how we want to proceed. My hope is that it's going to last. We won't have to address this for a number of years. It doesn't make any sense to just shutter it now. It's running great. We're only making half, but at least we're making half, so that's better than nothing.
The one other thing I was going to say, and it's less for water and more just contract in general for the city, is that when we do projects like this, we should make sure that we tie the cost, the money that we're getting in return, the payments, to the debt that we're paying, and not sign a 10-year contract for a 20-year debt service, because then we're not in control for that back half of it. So I think that's something we should make sure that a mistake that we should make sure we don't make in the future. But as far as the hydroelectric plant, I think from what Rich is saying, it makes sense to run it until something breaks and costs more than it's worthwhile to fix, and then we go from there.
That sounds good. I see a lot of
I would
nods.
agree with that. It doesn't make sense to put any more money into something that's already
Yeah,
not
and when we
doing
have
as well.
something, that's up there, I'll bring it to you, and then we can have the real discussion. If it's 20,000, do we spend that, or that kind of thing. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate your sharing the information of this. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is explanation of the HUTF inventory. missing one of the presenters. Oh, Mr. Ruff. Okay. Yeah, okay. Good evening, Doug Ruff. Would you introduce yourself and see you're going to explain the HUTF inventory. Would you begin by explaining what HUTF stands for?
I will, and I'm going to hand these to Robert to pass down. Yeah, so I did. I offered to City Manager Sanders to explain a little bit about this, since the Public Works Director isn't here to explain the HUTF process to you this year. On an annual basis, we submit a road mileage report to the state so that they can calculate, the City of Cortez's portion of the fuel tax that's collected. It's a combination. There's a few taxes that are collected. The primary one being the 22 cents a gallon fuel tax. Also, with the faster registration law that went into place, I think about 10 years ago, if you remember, there was a portion of the vehicle registration tax that also went into road improvements. So that mileage calculations gets sent up to CDOT every year, that we certify these are the number of miles that the City of Cortez maintains, and they put it through their formulas based on the amount of money that they have available and based on the amount of money, amount of mileage that other municipalities and counties have. Then they send down a portion of that money to the City of Cortez. That number, also interestingly for the City of Cortez, a good portion of that calculation is the number of vehicles registered within the city, which sort of makes sense for a city in that you have a lot of less mileage impact, but you also do have a lot of vehicles that are driving around, so that density of vehicles. And for the calendar year 2021, Cortez received $275,000. In 2020, it was $251,000. I imagine that may have been down. Maybe fuel sales are down a little bit in 2020. Not a huge sum of money, but that money is to go towards street maintenance. And also I provided council just a lot of what I do on an annual basis when I prepare the report is to put together maps and documents outlining the public works projects that occurred during that year, put that information into the GIS. It's also important to report that up to the state, because then they have an idea of what all the publicly maintained road network throughout the state, what the condition is, and they can better plan and manage for that. So on that first page map is a map that I included in that report, and then I go segment by segment. You don't necessarily have to read this, but segment by segment, I go through and say exactly the updates that were done during that year. Primarily for reporting in the public works system and in the GIS, we have two different types of reports, two different types of changes. One is kind of a maintenance item, and one is a major improvement, a reconstruction, or a street addition. And that's what really matters to the state as far as reporting. And I've been working on this, doing this report for Cortez for almost 15 years now. And it's that continuity of information, putting that information in, that allows us to do some pretty good reporting. And that's what the last two maps are that I provided for you. Trying to get some maps ready for the new Public Works Director to get in so that he can see the condition of of the street network. The first map is street surface classifications. Basically breaks down the city network based on mileage. So for instance, we have 51.9 miles of paved roads, 4.3 miles of chip sealed roads, and 1.7 miles of gravel road, which was a reduction by almost a mile since last year. We did a couple segments of roads that are now paved roads. And then the next map shows the year that the roads were initially or underwent a major reconstruction, and by a 5-year period going back about 25 years. So that answers some of your questions. The HUTF, it's been in place since 1953, and it's one of those things that makes a lot of sense as far as helping keep a good road network funded throughout the state equitably. And we will see what the state does as far as electric vehicles. I know there's some conversation as far as that goes. If they're not paying into the gas tax, how do they contribute to the funding of the road network? And we'll see where they go with that. But I'm sure that'll all be worked out through the HUTF process in some way or another.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. We appreciate your sharing the information with us. Are there questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question about the new Road J. Would that not be included in this?
The new Road J is in the county.
Okay, even, so no portion of it would be counted that's east of Sligo?
Right, the 7th Street up to Sligo Street is the city portion. So that new Road J. I just kind of blanked everything out. I didn't show anything outside of the city, even though we do the exact same report for the county.
Okay, thank you.
And just a question, the state pays similar funding to the counties as well, not just municipalities, is that correct?
They do, right. Counties, municipalities, CDOT takes their portion off the top, which is the lion's share. And it's based on road mileage, so the county gets a portion as well. And it's pretty much based on size. Those reports are available on the CDOT the Treasury Department's website, and you can look at what other municipalities are getting around the state. So.
Any other questions? Thank you again, Mr. Roth.
Thank you.
Appreciate your sharing this information with us.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the council discussion on possible declaration of a housing emergency. Who would like to open up this conversation?
Mayor and Council, this is certainly a topic of great discussion across our state, indeed our entire region. This has been brought up at the Economic Development Work Group for the county in which we participate, and it's been suggested that we at least look at this and decide whether or not this fits us. It warrants a council discussion, and therefore we lay it before you as part of this workshop. I don't have any foundation other than to say we would, were we to do this, and I would defer to our city attorney on this, but I think we would have to actually establish what our emergency is and how that fits state law before we actually go down this road. At the suggestion of Councilmember Medina, I did check with CML to see if other counties or municipalities in the state are doing this. We know of two, one in Crested Butte, which has actually declared an emergency, and then Summit County that has actually declared, and Mike will have to correct me here, but I believe they declared a crisis. And so they didn't go so far as to say emergency. And then there's the town of Frisco who is considering it. They have not done it. Now CML says that this is all they think there are, but there may be others that they're just not aware of, but for now, this is what we know. But our city attorney's done a little bit of work on this in advance, and I'd like to turn the time over to him if that's agreeable to the chair. Yeah, he said it is, or he motioned, yeah.
I read through these things, these resolutions, and I have a couple of comments. The first is they have a lot of factual detail in them about what's creating the situation. It's also notable to point out that these are two mountain resort towns where housing is at a premium even when it's not an emergency or a dire situation. It's probably a different living situation than Cortez, and it's a different maybe market. The other thing is, one is a crisis. They didn't declare an emergency. When you look at the definitions of emergency and disaster that I gave you, which is out of the state statutes for declaration of disaster and emergency, I don't think a housing crisis is, you can include it in those definitions. So the other one, where they actually declared an emergency, is questionable to not really a good declaration in my mind as a legal theory. If you wanted to do something like this, and I don't mean an emergency, but maybe declare a crisis, maybe declare a need, if you look at the whereases, these folks developed a whole lot of statistics that we don't have right now, that we would have to get together to do something. The other part of this that is a bit interesting is they pretty much gutted the process for land use code. I think when you read these resolutions, they talk about getting rid of schedules, getting rid of expediting things. I'm not sure we can do that either legally or as a practical matter, because it will create situations. Are we treating everybody the same? Wow, I was a year earlier and you didn't make me do, or you made me do all this. Now you let a competitor in to build something. It doesn't seem fair unless you really have a situation that requires extraordinary measures. And I don't know that we do or don't factually to support these declarations. And that's what I'd be wanting to see developed first is, okay, the one part talked about the number of ads in the newspaper. They talked about the number of housing units available through other sources. They talked about the type of people they were looking to serve. They got into this. They used the census. So I think we'd have to take some time in order to be able to put something together if that's what council wanted to do. And I would not recommend as a legal matter it be called an emergency. I think we have to call it something else. I'd also, I'm not sure what the housing authority's doing, and I don't know about stepping on their toes. You know, does this create a situation for them for funding? Would we be damaging their efforts to move forward? I don't know. We want to make sure we were a good partner with the housing authority so as not to cause any harm out there. But that's all, kind of where I am on it.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
Which, you said Crested Butte declared the emergency?
Yes.
Okay.
Summit County declared the crisis.
Okay.
And Crested Butte, and those are two radically different areas, by the way.
Yes.
As far as housing needs and size. One's a county and one is just, I'm not even sure how big. Crested Butte, when I was traveling around, was pretty small, but I don't know if how much of the ski area is in it and how much isn't as far as housing.
How long ago did they declare an emergency?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Looks like 2021, it was resolution number 11, and it is dated June 7th, 2021, Crested Butte.
So it's pretty recent.
Yes.
Was there intention to access state funding for the purposes of that emergency?
They, when the resolution, they declare a local disaster emergency because of a lack of affordable available workforce housing, warrants the mobilizing of emergency response and furnishing of aid and assistance by the town of Crested Butte. It shall remain in effect until terminated. Powers. The town manager has all emergency powers as set forth in Article 9 and other sections of the Crested Butte Municipal Code, including but not limited to the ability to promulgate regulations or issue orders to accomplish the following measures: suspend provisions of the municipal code that prescribe procedures and timeframes if strict compliance would, in essence, be a hindrance to what you're doing. They move personnel around. It's almost like the emergency we declared for COVID, those kind of factors.
Okay, so the primary intention was just to bypass some of the regulations that were already in place.
That's what it appears. They waive all provisions for competitive bidding on affordable housing project, and they direct the finance director to purchase the necessary supplies in the open market. So it sounds like they are getting into the business of housing, although it doesn't directly say that. And then they are supposed to provide and make available for use temporary emergency housing. And then they're looking at this as being the same as a COVID emergency or a disaster emergency. And so there's all those other powers. They don't, I'm guessing their ordinance on emergencies sets out the spending limits like we did with ours for the city manager. He can spend so much without approval, and then he has to come in. And so I didn't go look at the Crested Butte code.
Okay, so the function of declaring a crisis wouldn't open up like the ability to bypass some of those regulations.
The difference is in what the county commissioner said, that it warranted immediate action, and said why. They wanted all the government's business and other employers in the county to thoroughly and explore and implement all strategies to mitigate the current workforce housing crisis. They begged Governor Paulus to recognize the nature of the emergency and give them some of the American Rescue Plan money. And their reasoning is their business community needed skilled workers, and without housing, they weren't going to be able to have them. And so that was their focus. And they didn't really, if you look at them, and I can get these circulated to you, I thought you had them, I apologize. It looks like they were making more of a statement of a need, whereas Crested Butte actually focused some resources. And like I say, I don't know what the rest of their ordinance says, but they would be doing whatever we would have done, say, in a COVID emergency if something had happened.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm very unclear on this. What was being done by Crested Butte or some of these communities that had the crisis or the emergency and were put into action? Who would do this work, and who would be in charge?
It looked like Crested Butte was assuming some of the responsibilities itself when you read the resolution. And by declaring their emergency, it would be their resources and their energies, and I guess they would be looking for partners. Like I say, I didn't go research the full ordinance that they had as to how to declare emergencies and who has what powers. But they seem to be more active, and Summit County was making more of a policy statement, I guess, if I look at it, what they wanted to see done. I can find out more information on Crested Butte if that's what you wish, but I think they were going to be more active because they were talking, they had only 2 ads for housing in that small community, and so they weren't able to attract. There was an article in a newspaper attached about bicycle mechanics, trained, experienced bicycle mechanics for that's a huge mountain biking mecca. And so they had that problem, and then the process, evidently, There was the bike store had a place she was trying to build for 2 employees out back behind her store, and she couldn't get it processed quickly enough. So that's what they were trying to address. And it looked like they were willing to put resources to it.
Thank you.
I hope that was an answer. I wandered around, I'm sorry.
In comparison, I just wonder how serious our issues are, because I know they're quite obvious and need to be addressed, but to what degree and who would handle that, I'm not sure. Even, I'm sure council would have to approve that, but beyond that.
I think we would have to substantiate the need, and that would be the process I'd recommend looking at first.
Well, I think one of the ways that the ways we could look at the need is the availability of housing for purchase at prices for the wages that are earned by people in our community. And I think that's something we could definitely have staff look at. That data is out there from realtors and it's available from the census, the median incomes, and we know the incomes of teachers, the kind of jobs that we need in our community. We can look at that and kind of see, okay, if the median house, or if there aren't houses available that can be purchased by teachers, police officers, the people who we need to live in our community, then that is an issue that we should look at. I don't know if emergency or crisis or whatever is the correct way to handle it, but I do think we as a council should be looking at that. And there are things that we can do to encourage building. I mean, we've talked about ADUs as one of the things. It's on our agenda later this evening to talk about the use tax. Us providing some abatement on that could potentially, or below certain house prices, could help spur some development. Those are the kind of things I think that we should be thinking about.
These communities, before I forget, are actually more rental communities than they are purchase communities. They're dealing with a rental market that doesn't exist for employees versus this home ownership, and that's a big difference. In the, what do you call it? One of the planners did it once, a housing inventory. How many trailers are available? How many apartments are available? How many houses to rent? How many houses, trailers, and whatever are available to sell? So it's that's where these folks are headed. They're competing basically with, I can rent my condo to somebody 2 weeks at a time and make more money than I can renting it to 4 or 5 guys who are going to tear it up. And so that's what's here. So I would recommend we look at the rental market also. Now, something that's come up and it's been very interesting, Dove Creek's been looking at it, is Bayfield has some sort of a program they're starting about more along the lines what you're talking about. They're starting to partner with some other agencies or groups, and they're buying some land or donating some land or something, and other people are developing it to have lower priced housing available for key personnel, the starting out people in the professions to buy. I don't think it was rentals, but like I say, that's the situation here. These people don't have anything to rent to anybody. The price wouldn't even be affordable to most people. So I mean, I would ask we look at rentals as well, not just purchase housing.
And I do think that we're kind of in a different situation than the 2 communities that we're talking about here, because not only are they ski towns, but they have, a seasonal workforce, so we definitely have a lot less of that. And I agree with what Robert just mentioned. I think that rather than to claim, an emergency declaration or something along those lines, I'd rather see us really take a look at the existing comprehensive plan, what's in there, and talk about, is that included in some of the visioning stuff, so that I'd rather frame it personally, because I do believe it is an issue through like an action plan or a task force or something like that along those lines. So it's actually something that's a little, has a little more teeth to it, because just saying that, you know, it's an emergency without, you know, any actionable steps after that, I think really doesn't help the situation, in my opinion.
Well, and it's also a greater community-wide situation. I mean, it's something that would probably make sense for us to work with the county as well as the other municipalities on a more comprehensive thing. And I think there's things that the city of Cortez can do, but I do think that us looking at the kind of greater Montezuma County community, we can all look at that together and say, okay, the county can do this, that'll help. The city can do this, that'll help. Dolores, Mancos, Toyac can all do these things that can help. So I think that would be a great way to go about it.
I think the other approach we need to take is incentives. That seems like some low-hanging fruit. And this CHAMP program that was put in 2019, I would like to see that on our agenda so that council can look at that and see if we want to make changes and then adopt something in that sense. Can we have that, you know, as soon as the next meeting?
I don't think that program really was all that successful. I don't remember. There was some different approaches talked about doing it neighborhood by neighborhood through the city, but we chose to do it at the whole city at that time. So there
Is that legal advice?
Yeah, it was what we talked about doing as far as how to structure it legally, what we were talking about doing about spending money. And my memory serves, the planning and building department made it citywide, and we didn't get that big a response from it. And the way it was structured was for single-family housing that was limited in demand at the time, or response to the, what do you call it, the incentives. So I don't know if it would, whether or not it would work again, I am unclear.
My understanding looking at that program is that it was targeted to specific locations and not citywide as a whole.
When I was getting, I guess what I referred about, and I was probably incorrect in saying it, one of the discussions was of like doing one specific neighborhood at a time instead of several. And that was what I remember happening, was it went out to several neighborhoods that had struggling subdivisions, and it tried to help several, and that was just the difference. So I don't know.
Well, I think this at least is worth looking at and seeing if there's improvements we can do to this and if it's something that we would like to adopt and try again.
I don't
Yeah, I tend to agree. If I can jump in here, Mike. I tend to agree, council member, mayor. This is something we can look at. Really the only things that the city can do is create incentive, like in the removing of some taxation and so on. We can look at that. I think what our city attorney's trying to say is the last attempt didn't move the needle. Doesn't mean we don't try to revamp, doesn't mean we don't try to, you know, re-roll it out in a different way that's going to move the needle, but that didn't work. Let's try a little something else, and you know, as long as we're trying to do something that's going to be impactful, I think that's what we do. You know, right now it's minimal, but us coupled with the county and our other partners and so on, and Housing Authority opinion projects and so on, maybe there are a few things we can do. Let's take a look at it if that's agreeable to council.
Yeah, what I was thinking too, there's a lot of homework that's going to start passing an ordinance like this. I mean, there's, like you said before, that they tried before with these subdivisions that were not developed. I mean, they were developed, but nobody could build in there. Then we tried that incentive, and it didn't reach anything. I mean, because there still takes money to build, and then especially with everything going on with the materials and everything, I think there's a lot more homework that needs to be done before we put an ordinance together, because the biggest thing is the funding. Where's the funding going to come from?
Well, and, you know, we can talk about, you know, whether we want to waive fees completely or if we want to have different kind of payment plans. You know, they, like 5 years, you know, after they've made some money, then they, you know, then they can back pay those fees. I think it's worth having a conversation and kind of, you know, seeing what approaches we can have, because this was pre-pandemic and a lot of things, you know, things change fast. So it could be different situations. And then also, I can see the benefit of, updating the land use code takes a long time, and so I can see the benefit of kind of temporarily expediting changes to incentivize density. But, I think we also do need to have conversations about that, and I don't know if that is declaring a crisis or if it's, because we do want to still include the public on those changes and those decisions. Okay, that's all.
Well, your process to do that, remember, we'd have to go to P&Z, then we'd have to come back to council for an ordinance to amend things. I don't think we could expeditiously get rid of timelines in the land use code. And so I think that's a good idea. It's just, is it going to be quick enough? And what do you want us to look at? Because I agree we need to do something. My comments, I'm sorry if they were taken the wrong way, were just what we did the last time didn't really, as Worley said, move the needle, or the manager said, all that much. So we do need to look at something slightly different.
Oh, and then I'd also like to see us work with the housing authority and kind of understand where they are in terms of their properties and their timeline of building other houses, and see if we can partner with them and maybe expedite those projects or incentivize them.
Okay, we can look at that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, it's been a great discussion. It's a complicated subject, and we'll look into this further. Thank you all for putting your input into this. We'll jump to the general council discussion now. Council members, does anyone have any subject they'd like to bring up? Seeing none?
Wait, don't go just yet.
Okay.
I just wanted to invite council members, anybody in the audience, to it's a community planning session that is occurring on March 8th from 1 to 5, and it is hosted by Team Up of Southwest Colorado. And their intention with this community planning session is to address the learning gap that was experienced by the youth in our community as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you're familiar with Team Up Southwest Colorado, several years ago they had what was called a Turn the Curve, which is essentially what they're going to be doing at this event, a community planning process that was focused on youth and families, and it resulted in the development of the Food Security Action Team, the Early Childhood Education Expansion Action Team, the Child Maltreatment Prevention Action Team, and so on. But this session will be more specifically targeted towards youth and supporting them outside of school hours to try to help bridge that gap in learning. So anybody's welcome that is interested in helping the youth in our community. And you can find it online through Team Up's Facebook page, I guess is what I can say. But maybe I'll share it with John Brooks and see if he would be willing to share it out. I don't know if he can or not. But
Send us what you got, and we'll take a look at it, and if it's something that is in our policy, we'll be happy to.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Well,
That's March 8th?
March 8th, 1 to 5.
Okay. Thank you, Arlena. Any other comments? We'll adjourn this work session, and we'll reconvene the regular session at 7:30. Thank you.